Well, hello, and welcome back to another episode of the MedTech Wealth Advisor podcast. I'm your host, Matt Nelson, and this week on the show, I have a special guest. Now, last time we talked about estate planning in a two-part series, and there's a lot of great help there with, as we continue our mission to teach professionals in MedTech about personal finance topics. But today I wanted to talk to you about the industry, about your careers in it, how you can advance both your involvement in this amazing ecosystem we have here developed in Minnesota. And so I asked Frank Jaskulke to join us. He's from Medical Alley. Hopefully I got your name right there,
Right
Frank.
on.
That's
Yeah.
great. Vice President of Innovation over at Medical Alley. Now, they're a not-for-profit association. And, for listeners that don't know, we'll get into a little bit more of their background. But their mission really is to be the epicenter of health, innovation, and care. And this year is their 40th anniversary, I understand, 2024. Now, our guest has been part of that journey for almost 20 years now. I think 19 years
Yeah.
marks this year. Very good. It's been a solid 19-year run so far. A lot more innovation to come. But I just wanted to note a couple of highlights so far that I understand of Frank's career. He was very involved in the angel investor tax credit that was implemented. It's had a huge impact on the Minnesota ecosystem, and we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as contributing to the formation of the MDIC, which Medical Device Innovation Consortium. And that's a huge win, I understand. And I'd love to hear your background to that as well. So, funny thing is, Frank, just a few weeks ago, I think on your very own podcast, the Medical Alley podcast, we also got to hear your background. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
very good timing. So if listeners want to go back and hear a little bit more about that, you can check out the Medical Alley podcast. It was just done a 2 or 3 episodes or so. It's 2 or 3 episodes ago. So anyway, thanks for joining me today. After hearing that kind of brief introduction, is there anything else you think listeners should know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on and sharing a little bit of background about Medical Alley. This is a topic I'm always interested to talk about, but I love the angle that you take on it of connecting to medtech professionals, their career development, their savings and their wealth development. So much of Medical Alley's work I really think about is around community wealth development. And a lot of that has to do with the individuals in this ecosystem contributing towards a larger goal. And so that I think there's a lot of parallels to the work you do and the community you're building and the work that Medical Alley is doing in the community we represent.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I remember when my firm joined and we had the discussion, you and I just, a little while back, almost a year ago now.
Yeah.
And we talked about what would the relevance be. And I explained, we have this mission to serve our clients well, to help them be able to focus on their mission. And as we started to tie that together with what they do in their industry, the super mission driven career, how do we take all the heavy lifting off their plate from a financial planning standpoint so they can focus on that innovation? And so you're exactly right. I think it's a beautiful kind of tie together
Yeah.
today. But basically what I wanted to focus on is kind of the career aspect. So we're going to hear a little bit about Medical Alley. And then for those who aren't involved, we could talk about how that could be relevant. What if you're just starting your career, or maybe you've got an established career you're trying to advance. And of course, if you're also a founder, we want to understand how is this relevant, and then certainly hear about your take on what's happening in the industry today.
Right on. Yeah.
So very good. So let's start with a little background on Medical Alley. Like, what's the history? How did this get set up, and why does it exist?
Yeah, the why it exists is surprisingly relevant today, and it's I think a fun story. So for the listeners, if anyone's read The Innovator's Dilemma by Clay Christensen, great business book, among the most famous business books ever written, it's about Minnesota. It
Uh,
really crazily is. The companies that he studied to come up with his theory of disruptive innovation were the hard drive and computer companies in Minnesota. IBM, Rand, Sperry, Unisys, all these different companies, Control Data being the biggest, that in a very short period of time disappeared. They got outcompeted by these upstart companies, and that was interesting for innovation. For Minnesota, it was quite bad. It was a lot of jobs, 30,000 jobs that evaporated in a 3 year period of time. That would be the equivalent of the entire medical device industry in Minnesota today disappearing 40 years ago when the state was much smaller than it is today.
Wow.
Devastating impact. In the wake of that industry collapsing, I don't know if this part of it is true, but it's a good story. Supposedly, Earl Bakken went around and knocked down the doors of the engineers who lost their jobs and hired them into Medtronic. They went from building big computers to building little computers, right? If you think about a pacemaker, small computer implanted in the body, you need electrical and mechanical and all kinds of engineering talent. So the destruction of one industry supercharged the growth of our device industry. And Earl, along with Governor Rudy Perpich, a guy named Lee Berlin, who came out of 3M and was a startup entrepreneur, they started Medical Alley to do two things. One, prevent what happened to the computing industry from happening to healthcare. I always think of it as ensure our ecosystem remains the disruptors and not the disrupted. And then, second, put Minnesota on the map. Tell the world what is going on here and attract people and technology and investment to grow the wealth of the state and, very importantly, to improve public health. So they went around the world, they told the story of this community, recruited other people and companies to the cause, and built this network that 40 years later, still doing fundamentally that core work. Tell the story around the world and make sure we remain the disruptors and not the disrupted.
Man, that is a fascinating story. I did not know that angle. I knew bits and pieces of that, but I didn't
Yeah,
realize the incredible impact and how fast the tech industry sort of
right?
exited.
Like you think about stuff like that should be durable and last, and in a very quick period of time, blink of an eye, gone.
Right. What a great story though of being able to roll that into and capture
Right.
all that expertise. I mean, if that had left the state, I think where we'd be today. It's just that's incredible. Well, that's a great foundational story. And um, where do you think that Medical Alley is taking the industry from? I understand by that. I guess I understand there are other associations that
Mhm.
deal in similar vein. So maybe describe how Medical Alley is different than some of those and
Yeah.
where they're leading Minnesota.
Yeah, right on. So there are other associations around the country that are focused on, say, med tech or biotech or healthcare, and on their state ecosystems. What has made Medical Alley unique, really from day one, and this was Earl's other idea with Medical Alley, was we have the entire continuum of care. So people often know the medical device companies, but we also have the hospitals, the insurance companies, the digital health, even some drug companies that are in the state, and then the supply chain that is around it, including the financial services. Right? If you imagine a startup or a large company in this space, all the different inputs that they might need to build a successful business, we have that in the membership community and more broadly in the ecosystem. And that I think is the real power of Medical Alley, that wherever you sit in the ecosystem, you can interact with, learn from, and educate the groups that are upstream and downstream from your point in the ecosystem. And we believe, and we've seen it prove out, that that creates better innovations to improve public health, more creative partnerships, new business opportunities, and drives growth, drives wealth creation, job creation, makes us more vibrant than if we were only medical device or only hospitals in the association.
Right. Yeah. Very good. It's a great explanation. In fact, one of my introductions to Medical Alley happened to be when you started the podcast back, I think, in 2020. And of course, there was a bit of a crisis, healthcare crisis
Yeah.
going on at that time. And I was struck by how industry leaders from seemingly opposing industries, at least from ones that might feel competition or
Right.
disincentive to help each other, that they seem to be coming together and really want to serve well.
Yeah, that is A really unique, I think, cultural touchstone of this ecosystem that when we talk to our counterparts around the country and the world, they observe that they don't see in their ecosystems, and that is the competitors here work together. They compete, they want to best each other, but they really do put, as the Mayo mission says, the needs of the patient first. And when it comes to improving public health, they will set aside that competition and work together to do things to make it better. We saw, especially during the pandemic, that really played out where companies like Medtronic and Boston Scientific and Abbott got together, shared technology, shared procedures, so they could more rapidly develop ventilators, for example. And the hospitals were interacting to say who had more or less PPE and made sure that even though they all needed it, that it got to the most in need systems very quickly. And that, anyone could do that, but very few places do that. And here you have a community where they really do set aside the competition from time to time to try and improve public health. And one of my favorite examples in my career has been something you mentioned at the beginning, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium. So those of the listeners who are in the device industry may remember in like '06, '07, '08, it was extremely difficult to get new devices through the FDA, especially if they were a PMA, or a complex medical device. We had companies that just outright failed because the bar kept getting raised and new standards were put in after the fact, and companies just couldn't keep up. Every association in the country was trying to fix this, and they were all fixing it with the one tool they had. They were lobbying. They said, hey, let's change the law. Let's write new rules. Let's tell the FDA they've got to do it this way. We thought to ourselves, well, we could do that. But if we did that, we'd really just like push the FDA into a corner, and we still got to work with them, right? We need to have a constructive relationship with them to ensure we deliver safe and effective products. So instead of going with the adversarial, hire the lawyers, go and lobby route, we went and engaged with FDA scientists and tried to understand what were their concerns, what were the challenges they saw, what were the things they thought industry wasn't doing. And then we brought them to their counterparts in the industry and had conversations around those topics and came to understand that there were actually a lot of things where they had common ground, but they
Sure.
didn't have a mechanism to understand that and then create new standards or policies or regulations that were constructive. So we created a national organization, the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, or MDIC, spun it out, hired a team, recruited supporters, put it in Washington, D.C., so to be close to the agency. And now that group brings the scientists from FDA and the scientists from industry together to jointly work on improving product safety and product efficacy. And since that went through, most anyone you talk to who's bringing devices through the FDA will tell you that there's still challenges. There's always
Sure.
challenges, but it is dramatically better because of that constructive approach, as opposed to saying we've got to put them in their place, we've got to pass new regulations of our own making. We went the constructive approach.
That's fantastic. I mean, what that again, what a great story of a reason why you need an industry association. And, that
Mhm.
with, between that and your work on the angel investor tax credit,
Yeah.
that has had to have had a major impact on investment made in Minnesota. Maybe talk about that piece of it.
Yeah. For the listeners, if you don't know about the angel investor tax credit and you are or you're thinking about angel investing, you should know about it. Google it, look it up, read through all the regulations, get professional advice, of course. But here's the basics: the angel investor tax credit says if you make an investment as an individual or through an angel fund into a Minnesota-based startup that's in a high-tech field like medical device or biotech, the state of Minnesota will give you a 25% refund on that investment. You put $100,000 in, you're going to get $25,000 back. We wrote that legislation modeled after some things we'd seen in other places as a way to incent more innovation and more investment in startups in the state. The idea was it would reduce your risk, right? Your 100,000, the risk is now 75,000. And if you think about if things were to go south, the tax write-offs that are in there, you buy down your risk a lot,
Sure.
but you also free up additional capital. Some companies have actually worked with their investors where they'll then invest the subsequent credit they get back. So they're able to put more capital into the company at the same cost.
Sure.
So beneficial for the company, beneficial for the investors. When we were working on this legislation, it was at a time when there was sort of a gap in the early stage investor community. There had been this generation of very active medtech angels who they were retiring. They were quite literally passing away. And so they couldn't continue to invest. And we were worried that there would be a donut hole, a long period of time where there wouldn't be sufficient investment in new companies to fill the innovation pipeline. You need new companies that create jobs and innovation that might get acquired by the bigs, that might become big companies. That's what drives growth and wealth creation in the ecosystem and keeps the state healthy. Since the passage of that legislation, healthcare companies have raised over $1.5 billion, and that's
Wow.
in 13 years. These are small, early stage new companies, so it's a very significant amount of money.
Hmm.
And very importantly, it wasn't just for medtech or biotech. It was written so that it applied to all of high tech. So if you look at across all companies that have benefited from it, it's probably closer to $5 to $7 billion that has been raised. And we're now starting to see exits. Companies that use the angel tax credit got to a point where they exited and returned capital back to their investors. Those who are involved in the medtech industry know that's a long cycle.
It's,
The fact that we're now seeing that recycling of capital and of talent gives me a lot of confidence that we're going to see even more innovation over the next 5 or 10 year period. Is now we've got people who have been there and done that. They've got the experience. They've built a better network. They've connected with investors. It's never easy,
yeah.
but it's easier the second time around. And we're seeing now a lot more second time around entrepreneurs.
That's great. In fact, I mean, it just adds to the cachet of Medical Alley. Is it's this, it's akin to Silicon Valley in California.
Indeed.
We're developing that here, and that creates a different level of financial acumen that's needed too. It's no easy feat to go start up a company, but it gives also opportunity for maybe seasoned executives, seasoned professionals, leave, go start a firm, maybe go leave and start working with a startup firm. A lot of different considerations they have there, which of course is right up our alley, of course, to be able to help with that.
Indeed.
Well, moving on to just, I wanted to get your take on, what are some of the most important changes you're seeing in the healthcare industry to get today? You have a different level of visibility across the industry, and I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, I think there are two really transformative changes that we're experiencing right now. One is digitalization of healthcare. We've talked about digital medicine, virtual care, big data for decades, but the technology wasn't there. The compute power wasn't there to handle it. Combined with the cost of the technology was so high. As compute power has gone up and the cost of compute has gone down, we're now able to do things that 20 years ago we couldn't even imagine. And it will take a while, but we're already seeing that diffuse into healthcare and have an impact on cost and quality. So, as we deploy new revenue cycle systems at hospitals, they can more efficiently bill and collect. Um, we're seeing technologies that make it easier for a patient to find the right clinician, get the right care at the right time. I sometimes have to remind myself that it was not that long ago that setting up an appointment meant calling the doctor's office, going back and forth in your day planner to look where there might be an opening, right? And now I go to Alina, I can go onto the website, I can see the availability of my doc, pick an appointment, and it's set. And then if I need labs or other things, it's all electronic, and then I get the results on my phone. And because I also go to Mayo Clinic for specialty care, well, my health record from Alina is immediately sent to Mayo and combined. So I have one health record between the two systems. That's only been in the last 6 or 7 years. So this digitalization of healthcare, we're still early in it, but I believe it's going to fundamentally transform cost and quality in very positive ways. The second big trend, though, is cost. We all know healthcare has been getting more expensive for, well, as long as any of us have been alive. I think it's finally hit that point where cost is having such a significant issue on access, on quality, on the decisions we make as patients, but also on the ability of new innovations to get to market, of hospitals to be viable. You know, if you followed the news for Minnesota or really anywhere in the country, you know how challenging it is to be a health system today. One executive told me that if you had a 3% net margin as a hospital, you would be in the top decile of all hospitals in the country. And the median hospital has a negative net margin. That's not viable long term. So that pressure of costs have got too high. There's a lot of money in the system, but maybe we're not spending it well. That's acting as a counter, as a push down on innovation. So I think the tension between how fast can we drive digital transformation to take out costs, improve efficiency, and free up space for clinical innovation,
Hmm.
combined with the cost pressures that we're facing, that I think is the biggest change we're seeing. They've always been there, but they finally reached a point where the technology is accessible enough and the cost pressures are high enough that we're really having to confront significant challenges in healthcare and make, hopefully, significant decisions on the direction we go.
Yes. Oh, that's great. I was going to follow that up with what you saw as some of the biggest risks you're seeing in the industry. I don't know if you'd want to expound on the same topic or if you have something else.
Yeah. I mean, I think the cost pressure is a real risk. If we can't change fast enough, the cost pressures could lead to more hospital closures, which not only have a care access problem, but also destroy a lot of jobs, right? Healthcare is a major, major employer in every state. The other, I think, major risk that I see in the industry is because everything in healthcare is so complex, right? Highly regulated, patient safety risks, very expensive. Anytime the markets are doing good or bad, healthcare, I think, overrepresents that. So when capital markets are down, I think healthcare innovation feels that even harder. When capital markets are up, we benefit from it, and so depending on how, you know, the rate environment, the economy, things like that go, we may feel that as an ecosystem more than what the general economy feels.
Interesting. That is significant. Well, thanks for sharing that. And you know, as I think to our most of our listeners, and what why they might care about Medical Alley and getting involved and that sort of thing, I wanted to ask you, from your standpoint, let's just say maybe you're just getting into the
Yeah.
industry, or it could be that you're advancing your career, but you're looking for that trajectory. Um, what do you see as the best way for someone to get involved, and how does that actually benefit them in their career?
Yeah. You know, the best way to get involved, I would argue, is get on the newsletter, come to the events. So, what do I mean by that? Newsletter, you're going to be in the information flow. There is so much happening every day in this community. No one can truly keep up, and don't try. You can't. But you can have a better perspective, a better knowledge of what's going on. And in doing that, you might find interesting companies, new job opportunities, partnerships. We see it all the time where a company realizes there's someone else who has a solution to their problem and it's just around the corner.
Sure.
So that's one. The second, come to the events, show up, network, build connections across the ecosystem. And there's really a fundamental, like, positively selfish reason to do that. So whether you're brand new in your career or you've been doing it for decades, having that network is an insurance policy, right? Like at some point in your career, something might happen where you lose your job or you want or need to make a change. If you've done the work up front, and it's not a lot of work, but if you've done the work up front to build that network, the relationships, the connections, finding that next role will be so much easier. I have met with so many people who they've had incredible careers of 25 or 30 years at one company. And they'll always tell me, like, I've never had to apply for a job. I haven't made a resume in 30 years. And they come out and it can be scary, right? They're coming into a job market that they haven't been involved in a long time. They haven't had to search for a while. If you have that big network, you've got a set of tools and a set of relationships that can provide the moral and mental support, but also can help open doors and extend your reach and make it easier. Conversely, by building the network, you're also helping others to do the same thing,
Right.
right? When you have a colleague or a coworker or someone you've never met before, but they know one of your colleagues or coworkers, having that network means you're also an asset to the community. And if you imagine if tens of thousands of individuals in this ecosystem all work to build networks, work to build relationships, that will increase the flow of opportunities, of innovations throughout the entire community. It actually makes us more productive and more wealthy as a community. And it helps you as an individual to be more secure in your work and find new opportunities. So get in the information flow by being on the newsletter, come to the events and build your network out.
Yeah, it's great advice. I mean, at any point along their career, and you're thinking about, the founders of these companies, they need to make connections with partners, partners that can provide vendor connections and so forth. And just like you said, the whole ecosystem is there, and it's merging today, merging the best of in person with, hey, now we can go out on LinkedIn and actually now you can
Right.
look people up, and so you meet someone at an event, and it's just kind of networking 101, but it's a beauty that we have it kind of in our backyard here in Twin Cities, such an active ecosystem. That's great.
And one more thing I might say, um, for those of us who are in more of a commercial or a sales type role, we kind of get it because like it's literally our job. If you're not in one of those roles, it can sometimes feel a little awkward or uncomfortable, right? The quote unquote cold calling. Something I learned a long time ago from a mentor that really changed my perspective was that turning it around and instead of thinking about what I'm going to get out of something, I'm out looking for opportunities to help others. And I've learned over the years that by doing that, A, it comes back tenfold. And then B, it is so much more comfortable and easy when I'm reaching out to someone I don't know, when I'm doing so because I think, oh, there's something I know that could help this person be more successful or do better work. And surprise, they tend to be more responsive
Yeah.
than if I were to reach out and say, hey, you don't know me, but would you do something for me?
Right.
Right? Make it
Right.
about the other person, and everything becomes just a lot easier in
That's
life.
that's great advice for anybody, any stage in their career. Well, Frank, just a few kind of rapid questions about you as we're coming to close this out. What's one idea that you think the majority of people get wrong?
Uh, I the easy one for that, which is I think especially in the entrepreneurial community, far too many people think the idea is the value, and the real value is in the execution. So there are a lot of people who have an idea for a new heart valve. There are very few people who do the work to see that heart valve get through to market. So I think that's a big one. Like the idea matters, but a okay idea relentlessly executed will outperform the greatest idea in the world without the execution behind it.
Yeah, excellent. That's very good. That makes me think of your work right now in the startup ecosystem. I understand that you've been doing a lot of that lately. Just kind of talk briefly about that and how you could get plugged in there.
Yeah. So back in 21, we launched an initiative called Medical Alley Starts, and you can go to medicalalley.starts.com and you'll see all the info on it. But the idea was we wanted to make it easier, never easy, but easier for entrepreneurs in healthcare. So we spent a year interviewing thousands of them and looking for patterns. What were the problems that they all ran into? And we identified a couple of them. They were trying to access capital, they're trying to find customers, and they're trying to find talent. And they were spending a lot of time doing the same things over and over again to get those resources. So, what we decided to do was build tools that allow a startup company to more easily do those activities, make it easier to find and connect with the investors, easier to find and connect with partners and customers, easier to find and connect with the talent you need to grow. And in doing so, speed up the companies, help them get to a key milestone faster. And then, second, reduce the risk of failure, right? Startups have an incredibly high rate of failure. And we've built this incredible community, even though the failure rate can be 90 to 95%. So we thought if we could reduce that by even a couple of points, we could dramatically increase the performance of this entire community. So we've been building these networks for a couple of years. We work with over 1,000 startups every year, and it's plugging them in. It's helping them find the resources they need more rapidly, the support they need to be successful, and getting them to the right people at the right place at the right time so they can do the good work and hopefully save a bunch of lives.
Yeah, very excellent. And to uh, do what you were saying earlier, the execution versus just having a great idea. So yeah, thanks for being there with the association to be able to carry that out, to help them carry that out. What's next for you, Frank?
Yeah, that's a good question. The in one sense, what's next is what's always been. Keep building the network, keep supporting the companies, make sure for the next 40 years this community is the epicenter of health innovation and care. On the other hand, big area we're working on right now is international expansion. There are incredible innovators, incredibly smart people all around the world. We want to flow them into this community. There's some incredible assets in Minnesota that can accelerate the development of new medical technologies. If we can get companies from Thailand or Japan or Australia or Canada to take advantage of those resources, it can bring new business to the state, and it can also bring new innovations to patients in need. So we've been spending a couple of years on building out international partnerships, and I think that will play a larger role in our work going forward. The mission will always be about Minnesota at the center, but if we can plug Minnesota into the world and the world into Minnesota, we'll be more successful as a result.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I really appreciate the time you've spent with us today, Frank. Before I kind of wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to leave with us?
I would just say to anyone out there listening, if you need help on something and you're not sure who to ask, reach out. medicalalley.org is our website. You don't have to be in Minnesota. You can be anywhere on earth. We'll try to be of service. And then most importantly, Matt, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you for doing the work that you do so that people can protect and grow their wealth, but also sharing your knowledge and telling your story. I think it's so important that more people know what the options are. And I appreciate that you're doing the work to make sure that happens.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Happy to do it. And Frank, if they want to get in touch with you personally, do you have a way that they can get in touch on LinkedIn? What's your
Yeah, easiest way, look me up on LinkedIn. You can find my email pretty easily on any of our websites, but LinkedIn's probably the fastest way to get a hold of me.
Okay, excellent. Very good. We'll hope to see you at some events soon.
Mhm.
And that's it. Thanks so much for listening. This show wouldn't be possible without you, our listeners in the MedTech community. If you're a fan of the show, please leave a review. It really does help us out. And subscribe, click the icon so you get notified of future shows. Maybe even pass it along to someone who might be interested. And look, if you have any comments or suggestions about future episodes, let me know. I'd love to hear them, entertain them for future episodes. You can contact me at mwapodcast@focusfinancial.com, mwapodcast@focusfinancial.com. But that's it. Until next time, remember, financial freedom takes more than money. So find your purpose and make a plan to live your life well. If you need any guidance, we're here. Take care of each other out there.